We'll click over here in just a moment, but we had several early birds in the chat ready to go, and thanks for joining us tonight, all of you. Should be a fun talk, and we're going to do something a little different tonight. We're going to have Robert is actually going to be running the show, so I'm going to be the guest. I'll be the co-host. No, we'll both be co-hosts, but he's got the prime podium, and he's going to make sure that instead of me bloviating for an hour today, that he'll get ample opportunity to bloviate. You hearing us okay, Toriano, Amanda? Anyone confirm that you can hear us? Yes, you're going to be herding cats. That definitely means she heard us.
Yeah, so what else is new?
Yeah, exactly.
We call this Wednesday.
That's right. Or for some of us, a weekday. Great, thank you, Hawkeye. Any weekday, we can be like that. And thanks again, everybody that joined us last night. Little impromptu family game, and the turnout was fantastic. Hey, Joffrey, by the way, I know I owe you a text. I saw your text. I just was getting ready for this, so I'll get back to you on that. But yeah, welcome, everyone. Doing anything to celebrate the new year, Rob?
Yeah, going to dinner early. Normally I go to dinner early on New Year's Eve because I want to make sure that I'm home before all the wild people with no self-restraint are out on the road. And I'll be honest with you, I usually spend my New Year's Eve online. I'll probably, in times past, I might be playing World of Warcraft with guildies and just basically hanging out through everybody else's, clock turning 2 years since we were on the East Coast, and
right.
We'd have people out as far west as California, and even some in Alaska. So got to hang out for up to like 4 a.m, wishing people Happy New Year's.
Very cool, very cool. Well, that sounds like a good way to do it. And now we're just going over with some friends. All right, well, let's go ahead and we're going to kick this off here in 3, 2, and 1. Good evening and welcome to Blue Box. This is Loremaster's Arcanum, episode number 101, Robert. And we're excited to be here tonight. It's going to be a quick hour for us, one of our normal sort of regular hour shows. As you know, our LMA time can vary depending on guests and topics, but our typical is 5:45 to 6:45 Central. We've started as early as 5. Oftentimes we'll do a 5:30 start, but we try to let you know. If you're ever surprised by these things, the easiest way to fix that is to make sure you're part of our Discord and also following us on Instagram. We always post the schedules. We update if there are any changes to time so everyone is in the loop. And we're going to spend an hour today talking about using Homebrew, or probably using published content in Homebrew settings. Now, Robert and I chatted about this a little bit this week. I think we're going to be kind of blending back and forth between Homebrew content, Homebrew settings, published content, published settings. And really, Robert, I was thinking about this today. It's really even using published content in other published settings. Many of the same challenges, if you're going to adapt from one published setting to another, then in essence, some of the same mechanics become important. But we're going to let you lead the conversation tonight. So if you're watching if you've watched us many times before, typically I am in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and my co-host, the ever-mistaken Robert, is usually up in the upper right-hand corner or top right-hand corner of the screen, top right, top center, whatever, I'm saying. But today we flipped it because he's going to be leading the conversation, and I can tell by the smirk when I referred to his nomiker that I'm in for it tonight. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and Robert, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure as always, John. It's kind of funny because when we initially proposed this, we're going to probably go 2 different ways with this, because I think the initial thing that I proposed was homebrew stuff in a published campaign setting, but Honestly, I think we can probably fit in both of them this evening. It shouldn't take, it should be doable.
I agree.
And besides, we can always talk about this again sometime. Once we through arguing.
I have a hunch it won't be the last time. Yeah, I think this topic really it deserves more than an hour, and I think it's one that we could bring guests on. And Rob, I think what would be really good would be in the future to do some actual working examples. So maybe take a setting, take a piece of published content, and we could work through it, do some of the adaptations live, and show someone how they might want to do that for their own game. So I think we could do a few of these.
That would be an excellent idea. So, Amanda, I'm going to put you to work really early. Can you do me a favor and put up a poll? It'd probably be helpful if more were already on, but what the heck? Put up a poll, and I'm curious as to how many people run their campaigns using their own homebrew setting. Basically, make it. Do you use a homebrew setting or published setting? It doesn't matter what the published setting.
Yeah, good.
I'm just curious.
I like that, Robert. That's a good one. And so let's both share sort of our experience while that poll is going on. And I'll start us off. In terms of settings, I use a multitude. So, currently I run a game in Greyhawk. I just concluded a game in Galarian, which in fact the Rune Lords campaign was also in Galarian. That's the published setting for Paizo. And then my Tears of Erd setting on Sundays now, I'm using the World of Erd. And one challenge that you do have with that is the lore for each of these different worlds and, keeping the gods straight. And I've even made a couple of mistakes in Tears of Erd because I'm in Altamira in both places. I've referenced Greyhawk lore in Erd. But then I also do like homebrew, and I've built homebrew worlds. I've actually got one called Riven Realm that's in World Anvil right now, and it's on the shelf. Probably see the light of day in 2024 or 2025. But each of those represents different challenges and opportunities. What about you, Rob?
I primarily run published settings, and we can talk about some of the reasons why I choose to go that route. Actually, it was kind of interesting. I was looking at the Discord earlier, and Pat66 kind of echoed some of the reasons why I go that route, mostly to save myself time. Though there are challenges. I'm looking at the homebrew. I want to make sure that people understand when we say homebrew, I'm specifically talking homebrew worlds, not homebrew, homebrew adventures.
Right.
Because and it could just be that's the number. If you do both, and I noticed that there's a few people who do both, what is your primary, go with whatever your primary would be. If you would prefer to do it in a published setting versus your own homebrew world, though I suspect that most people who have a homebrew world would prefer to do it there, run their adventures there. So some of the challenges, if you're going to run, a published adventure in your homebrew world, I guess the question is, you think about the things that you need to do to make it work. And looking from a published adventure standpoint, I guess the most obvious thing would be, where are you putting it in your homebrew world? Location-wise, because you kind of end up with a couple of things here. First, you end up with the theme of the setting of the adventure. What kind of adventure is it? Where does it take place? Is it somewhere in the cold, the wilds, the swamps, and such? So trying to figure that out. And then you have to figure out, well, is there a place in my homebrew world that this works? I'm curious, for those of you who, do have a homebrew world that you prefer to run in, do you do published adventures or any published adventures, or when you go homebrew world, you just go completely homebrew right through? And this doesn't have to be a poll, Amanda. I'm just asking in chat. And if you do if you do run published adventures in your homebrew world, what kind of challenges do you find? And John, you mentioned you had your homebrew world, Riven Realm, you said? I know you, how much did you get to actually use it? Is it Is it something that you've been working on, or was it something that was actively you were building, or was it something that you were actively using?
Yeah, so it's something I'm building. It's not seen the light of day yet. I've created homebrew settings before, years and years ago. Riven Realm is by far the most ambitious setting. You know, I've already done a bunch of the cartography myself using Campaign Cartographer 3, which is an AutoCAD program that is an absolute beast. But I've got, you know, custom races built out, lore, the core lore is built out. I've got a World Anvil site, but it's just not, it's not to the place yet where I want to show it. So that's a ways off. So, you know, what I've done a lot of, and as folks are answering in the chat, let's go ahead and look at a couple of these. So Black Knight, first-time chatter, said, Homebrew usually contains some elements of published settings. It depends on how much was published and how much your players have brought to the game. Okay, that's fair. And then Dark Elf said, I've been working in a world building with a whole world completely with the history and... I'm not sure what that word is. I run campaign... Do you see? I'm not yet.
Yeah. I'm not sure what that was supposed to be.
Campaigns. I don't know. Anyway, so I run campaigns in partially finished parts of it, and I love getting ideas for further solidifying. Yeah. So let me kind of jump in here with, I think you saw already that the poll was very heavily tilted for, you know, lots of folks here using Homebrew. What I like doing, whether it's a Homebrew world or an established world, is using published content to supplement my ideas as a dungeon master, or others will distinguish between a dungeon master and a world creator, or as Joffrey's referred to it, a realm weaver, whatever you want to call yourself. But it's tough to come up with all the ideas you know, from a complete sort of nascent genesis point. So it's great when you have this published content that you can import into your setting, even if that is, so let's say, for example, I'm in the world of Greyhawk, but I want to run a module from the Forgotten Realms, or I want to use some, you know, Eberron material, or heck, I'm using one of the old Middle-earth role-playing Iron Crown Enterprises modules. How do I plug that into my world? So there's the reasons I do it, and then there's the how I do it.
And, you know, there's... Actually, going back to what Dark Elf Twilight posted, it was interesting because one of the thoughts that I had with regards to you know, running a published adventure in your homebrew world is, if your world isn't yet fully fleshed out and it's something that you're building, there is that opportunity to take that published adventure and use it to build out part of your world. You know, put it someplace and work from there. Change the names as you need to fit. And I mean, unless you really want to just add those names to your homebrew world, but it's actually kind of a drop-in place if you don't have something set up yet. There you go. Suddenly you've got an area of your homebrew world that you didn't have before.
Exactly.
And you can kind of work from there. You know, you also bring up an interesting point as far as like taking elements from different worlds. And that brings the question of, well, you know, having to go through, one of the challenges I see is, beyond the where you're putting it, is what do you need to, what, besides possible locations and names and such, what else you might need to change? Are all the creatures that are there part of your homebrew world? Are all the character classes, the races and such, you know, are they in your homebrew world? And, you know, picking those things and going through and making sure that, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that it feels like part of your homebrew world.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think that's so critical. So I think to your point, Rob, some of the obvious things when you're taking the published content into your homebrew world or transporting it into, like I do this all the time with Greyhawk Awakening. I did it all the time with Rise of the Rune Lords. I'm going to do it with every campaign I run because I like borrowing and blending ideas. But then what you're referring to is, you know, the adaptation that has to occur. The obvious things are things like names, you know, the civilizations, the races. We've even seen, like, for example, Anna B. Meyer talking about where you can keep on the Borderlands and just plop it anywhere in Greyhawk, and how you would, on the Flyness, and how you would do that. these types of adaptations, the obvious stuff would be geography and location. Secondary obvious things would be cultures, races, nationalities. Somebody posted earlier, I think it was Dark Elf, they really like Warforged as a race, as an example. Well, then figuring out how you blend that into your homebrew world. But I think your broader point, Rob, even goes deeper, which is, what about, the ecology of, the dungeons and the creatures that exist there? Is it consistent? Is there a coherence with your overarching campaign themes? Balancing, as an example. So if you're running a low magic campaign and you pop in a published setting that's, giving away very powerful magic items, you have all that adaptation that you have to do. And some of that can be done on the fly, and some people are better at doing that on the fly than others, but it's all stuff you have to think through.
Anyway, we have our Mike DM Dingbat came in with our first dinosaur one that I noted.
Yeah.
You can have dinosaurs in any campaign. Yes, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I'm sure Steve somewhere is smiling. So yeah, I mean, and here's an interesting one to consider. If you're doing it just from say you're just doing D&D to D&D. The other thing you need to consider is if you're going to drop a published thing into your world, or a published adventure into your world, you might be going between different editions. And there are, depending on how far back you go, there are substantial changes that may need to be made.
Exactly.
To the adventure.
Exactly.
To run there. Actually, and it's kind of one thing I would note is when we talk about dropping adventures in, there's actually we both as far as the world of Greyhawk and such, there is one really notable person who's kind of famous for dropping published adventures into a different world, and it's not a homebrew world. Well, it wasn't his homebrew world, but talk about dropping a published adventure into a different world than it was meant for. That'd be Gary Holian. He kind of co-opted all the adventures he could that were not that were setting agnostic, and found a place to put them in the world of Greyhawk.
No, absolutely, and a not so secretive element of all of this is that really a lot of great creators and DMs do this. We borrow ideas from other folk. I reached out to Richard Baker a couple of weeks ago. He was on with us for Loremaster's Arcanum, and he was involved in the creation of some of the content for the 2e version of Dark Sun. We talked about all his, the work that he did on so many other settings, but with Dark Sun specifically, he was the lead designer on 4th edition. Well, as I'm prepping, and this is a perfect example of customization, and I'm going to take just a moment, Robert, and kind of walk through this, taking content and putting it into a different setting. And I was asking him, hey, what would you recommend as adventures that are, good adventures in the Dark Sun setting that I could adapt into my Dark Sun-esque Flyness Greyhawk adaptation? And he mentioned some modules, including a couple that he worked on and created. But he also talked about using the old Slavers, the A1, series, and how easily that could be adapted into a Dark Sun style gaming campaign. And this is something that a lot of DMs do. There's that old adage: "There's nothing new under the sun." We all borrow and we create, and we're inspired by others.
Absolutely. I mean, I've taken, not so much recently, but in years past, I would take some of the stuff meant for Forgotten Realms and put it into Greyhawk. More of the smaller, it'd be more smaller adventures, because some of the larger ones were entirely too specific to Forgotten Realms. But smaller adventures like things I found in Dungeon Magazine, I might transpose if it was something that I wanted to run. And one thing, for those of you who look at published adventures and say, well, okay, trying to figure out where to put this in my homebrew world, one thing I would like you to consider is, especially if you're talking the one-off modules, the one-off adventures, not the sweeping epics that are level 1 through 14 or whatever the case may be. Modules, generally speaking, take place in a really tight tight area in an overall setting. I mean, the entire sweeping area of the Temple of Elemental Evil, probably one of the best known adventures ever. I think it all takes place in a 15-mile area.
Yeah.
Maybe, which is what, a hex and a half?
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's like, while you want to get the feel right, don't concern yourself too much. Well, okay, I'm going to put this here. It's not taking up as much space as you. It's not going to change your world, even if you just drop it in flat. It's not going to change as much of your world as you think. Really, honestly, it's probably not going to change much of your world at all, unless there's some massive event in the module that you need to use. Obviously, if you're talking one of the larger epics where it's like 5 adventures tied in, or the adventure paths from like 3E onward, that tends to be a slightly different animal. But for one-shot modules, yeah, here you can pretty much throw them anywhere that reasonably fits, and it won't change much at all.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one way that I use that a lot, Robert, is for pacing and for not just the tempo of the game, but to avoid things which are either too linear or become too repetitive. So, for example, if there's a larger story arc the party's pursuing, I've done it in Book 1 and Book 2 of GHA. I did it a lot in Rune Lords. And this story arc is being pursued, but then it becomes, too linear or feels too, that we're doing the same thing or following. Then just throwing a one-shot style side quest or something else that the party can engage in, do something different. One of my favorite that I did was for Virtual Greyhawk Con in 2021, where that one shot was run during the con, and I had the party, which was based in the Verbabank, right there around Hamlet. And through arcane means, they were transported to an ancient temple in the Sea of Dust, which was a bit of a 2 years ago, a premonition for where Book 3 was going, and got to run a one-shot and used some of this physical terrain. Like, the only time I've actually used this guy on stream, it was so much fun. I actually had sand on my table. It took me 2 weeks to clean up. But that's a fun way to use published content and inject it into broader campaigns as side quests and story arcs, which can create variety. And that variety can be either maybe it's more role play based if the game has been more combat based, or vice versa. And it can be different settings. It can be different. I like having the physical terrain variety, that forests and dungeons and mountaintops and seas and oceans and deserts and snow-capped. I think all of that sort of variety also creates a sense of differential in the game that I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. There are 2 comments from 2 different people that came back to back that I want to highlight, because they'll both go to a certain point that I want to make. Moose said, I ran across a stream where they were using the Caves of Chaos map from Keep on the Borderlands, but all the encounters and monsters were changed. And then Dark Elf Twilight. Plus, if you make the published content fit your world, it'll feel more natural and unique and different from the same published material in someone else's world. To Moose's point, I mean, one of the interesting things about using a published adventure in your homebrew world is, and part of this can go towards, as Dark Elf mentioned, making it fit the feel of the world, make it blend in a thing. There's nothing saying that you have to run. I mean, honestly, you probably never should do this anyway. There's absolutely nothing saying that you need to run the adventure as written. There's nothing saying that you can't just basically strip the adventure for parts.
Exactly. All the time.
Take the maps, take the locations, take the adventure idea and just throw away anything that you don't need, keep the stuff that you want to use, and put it somewhere in your world that it'll fit the way you want it to fit. Adapt it to your world, adapt it to the setting, adapt it to, because I mean, obviously, unless you're starting, and talking about an adventure that starts at level 1 or level 2 or whatever your campaign's normally start at, you're going to have a place where it's going to be something where the players have to go, or something the players have to do. So it's going to kind of have to fit where the players are at the moment. So make it fit into the overall campaign. And one of the things that I like to do, I ran a campaign that just recently finished up where it was using World of Greyhawk, but it was completely homebrew adventure with the exception of one piece. I needed between story arcs, I threw in White Plume Mountain. It takes place in the World of Greyhawk, so it was a natural fit. But from the sense of the campaign, I mention it because it's something that you can do with the published adventure. Start throwing out the hints ahead. Start introducing some of the elements ahead of time. Some of the people that, the NPCs that they may need to know for the campaign or for the published adventure, have the players know them already.
Yeah.
Have a place, fun to introduce them. This way, when you're putting it in your campaign, it's not suddenly the tenor of the campaign doesn't suddenly change now that you're running something published.
No.
You're already started the wheels in motion. They're already familiar. You get drawn into it as opposed to, okay, I know we've been doing homebrew adventuring at this point, but we're going to run this module now, and suddenly I feel like there'd be a disconnect in the feel of it if you're suddenly running a published adventure after doing a pure, doing a bunch of homebrew.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And a good example is what I have up on the screen right now. Most recently in Greyhawk Awakening Book 2, the party began in Relastra. This is all a homebrew campaign in the published setting of the Flyness. And everything, the story arcs, with Drax and the Fiend Sage and what's happening even with the broader GHA, that's all custom, and it's all being sort of woven together. But I felt an opportunity to introduce something into the game, which was a published piece of content, which was Gary Holian's Key to Spinecastle from Dragon Magazine. And that module, based on the cultists and the Temple of Hextor, was plugged into and became about 5 or 6 sessions, I think, of Greyhawk Awakening Book 2. But it was very much part of the game. It felt like part of the game. And this is another area that ties into something we've talked about before. And I do want to show some specific examples in a moment. But part of the way that I find you make published content work is not just adapting the content geographically or with the rule sets and whatnot, but the character backstories. When you can take your characters' backstories and then plug them into the published content, where you're weaving it in both directions. The published content is going into your homebrew is going into the published content, and now all of a sudden, you take, for example, let's go back to Rise of the Rune Lords, and the way that Alcott or Irda's stories weren't just backstories plugged into the game, but were actually then part of the way the entire story unfolded from the published content. Now these things become seamlessly integrated, and really all you're doing, like you said, Robert, you're stripping it down for parts. You're using this for inspiration, but ultimately you are weaving the story.
Absolutely. The more you can get the characters' stories, and it holds true anyway, but the more you can get the characters' personal stories tied into what it is they're doing, the better. Because you get that buy-in. When the characters are, when players have their character stories playing out in, the course of the game and the course of the adventure, there is that much more buy-in, hopefully by everybody, because sometimes it can be hard. There are times when, even in my campaigns, where one person's story may be taking a bit center stage for a while.
Sure.
But I try to make sure that I keep other elements going so that they don't all become lost in favor of whoever it is currently the main
focal point, right?
Yeah. But the more you get that buy-in, and the more that they become involved, they become invested. They become invested in character. They become invested in the story, and they want to know what's next. They want to know what's next for their character, and the adventure as well, obviously.
Yeah, well said. And Dark Elf was basically saying the same thing we just said, and you pinned it there, the homebrew bleeding into each other. Robert, let me just give a couple examples of some of the stuff that I'm talking about here. And one of the fun ones that not a lot of folks who are with Blue Box have seen because it was early on, is I did an adaptation. It was in a published setting, but it was a homebrew campaign. But it was using published content, so it was a real hodgepodge of different ideas and concepts, and it was in a fairly well-known setting. You might be familiar with this one, Rob. I've got it up on the screen now. Some people know what this is. So I wanted to run with a group. This was years ago. Actually, some guys who were software developers at my job. One of whom is Chris Carson. He's C. Carson. He played Brual, and he's still a big part of our community. And so I ran Middle Earth. But one of the problems with running Middle Earth is it's so frickin' well known. And when you're talking Third Age, the story is canon, and anything that you do there is going to be ancillary, right? I mean, you're not going to outstrip the destruction of the ring and the confrontation of Sauron in terms of import in what was happening at that time in the game world. So, sorry,
by the way,
go ahead.
Just for, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because that's also one of the issues I have with the world of Dragonlance. Is that so much of the story, and they've expanded beyond it, but it felt like so much of it revolved around the War of the Lance. It's like, okay, you're either ancillary characters to the War of the Lance, or you're basically trying to replay the War of the Lance.
Yes, exactly.
That's the part that everyone, most of the people were interested in. It's like, all right.
Yeah. Well said, Robert. So this is free for all you DMs out there. If you, and I'm not suggesting that I'm the first person in the world to have this idea. I'm going to show you that I clearly wasn't. But I think it worked out really well for me. And who knows, I might run something like this again. From scratch on Blue Box. But to me, the easy way around this in Middle Earth, you can go one of two directions. Well, three. Your option one is you run during the Third Age, and it's a side story. Somewhere else, something else going on. Could be political factions. Not everything has to be earth-shaking. And you can just assume that the ring and the war, all that's happening elsewhere. That's one way. Well, I guess there's four. You could tie yourself into the story as an appendage into the war. That would be the least thing I would want to do. I feel that would be too constraining as a DM. The third thing you could do is go back. Witch King of Angmar, First Age, second. You could do something in the different ages. Go all the way back. To the First Age and the Istar and all the things we're seeing actually right now with Rings of Power. No commentary there on the Amazon. I know a lot of the folks who are big on lore, they've taken some liberties there. But what I chose to do, to me, is the most obvious: Fourth Age. And it's fun to explore the Fourth Age in Lord of the Rings. And a lot of people think, well, the BBEG is gone. No, he's not. Who is the true BBEG, Robert, in Tolkien's lore? It's not Sauron. It's Morgoth. It's Morgoth or Melkor, who was thrown to the Outer Planes. He was cast to the Outer Planes. Sauron was simply his lieutenant. He's still out there, banished to the Outer Planes. There's really there's so much rich lore in Tolkien's world that carries forward to the Fourth Age. If you want to create something, Aragorn or Strider becomes King Elisar. That's his name in the Fourth Age. He's ruling from Minas Tirith. You have the elves going off to the Undying Lands. So all these things are happening, but you still have the major elements of the evil that has existed in Middle-earth is still there. And one of the things that was so much fun, there was a piece of published content, and I showed it earlier. I'm going to bring it up again here.
By the way, Amanda mentioned BBUG. Ashran.
Yes. So let me show you guys the. Sorry, go ahead.
So convinced she's the one.
Yeah, that's Morgoth, right? So this guy, this is called Palantir Quest. This was put together by Iron Crown Enterprises, and you hear us talk about them here on Blue Box from time to time. These guys made the Middle-earth role-playing system, or MERP. They made Roll Law, Arms Law, the Rolemaster series. They had some pretty cool stuff, and they're still putting stuff out today. If you are familiar with the kind of content they put out in the 80s, let me just say this. It is not user-friendly. The way these adventures are structured is actually abysmal. They're so steeped in lore and history, and it'll take you a while going back and forth in this to even figure out like what goes in what order. It's not purely sequential. It's hard to kind of muddle through. But inside here, there are absolute gems. You've got maps of Minas Tirith, and you've got maps of Tharbad, and these mapped out areas. So you almost look at this as a truly developed sandbox, Robert, which I know what you like. And the essence of this is that there were many Palantirs. We see, of course, the one or two Palantirs that are referenced in the Lord of the Rings, but there were originally several Palantirs, some of which were even as large as a house, and they were lost. And so this sprawling 161-page adventure that was published in the 80s was a delightful sandbox for me to play in. And then I brought in elements from the earlier ages, Turin-Turambar, who was to be reborn. The ultimate destruction of the Middle Earth is supposed to be at an event called Dagor Dagarath, which is essentially our Armageddon. And so playing off of those Fourth Age themes, where I'm no longer bound by Tolkien lore, because there's not a lot written about the Fourth Age. So as a DM now, you have that freedom to play a little bit more, but you have all this lore to leverage, and you still have these apocalyptic themes like Morgoth and Melkor. You still have Dagor Dagarath. You have the rebirth of Turin-Turambar, which we played in. Steve McKissick, one of my former head of development, he actually played. He didn't know he was Turin-Turambar reborn until much later in the game, and all those seeds were planted. This is a really fun place to adapt into your game. If you want to use this module, though, I'm going to tell you right now, it's a lot of work.
Looks fascinating. 160, you said 170 pages?
161 pages. You can find it's so far out of print, but you can find the PDF online. And
I'm sure.
If you're willing to muddle to it, 52 plus or 14. What are we looking at? 5, 3, 3, 2. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, it's so true. I missed the chat there. Fourth Age, Melkor, also called Morgoth, banished. It is, yeah. So
they actually do touch on that in Rings of Power, which is something that they didn't touch on at all they kind of ignored in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah,
pointing that out.
Yeah, and really you don't get a lot of reference to it even in the 3 books of the Lord of the Rings. It's mostly in the Silmarillion and in some of his other content. And there's some good.
That's one of those books that I admit that I finally finished it when I started reading it out of spite more than anything else, because I was determined to get through it. Honestly, as a kid, the Two Towers nearly broke me, because I was like, are they ever going to get to the damn mountain?
Well, look, there is some good stuff there, and I'm trying to remember. There's somebody in the chat can help me. I read the book. It's not the Silmarillion. It's a sub work that he did. It specifically tells the story of Turin, how he fights Glaurung. The original, he was sort of this tragic figure, a fascinating figure, a tragic hero, haunted. Crap, I'll look it up later. Somebody in the chat maybe can pop the book in there. They'll know. Yes, the Sons of Hurin. Thank you, Dark Elf Twilight. That's actually a good read. It still has some of the Tolkien-esque depth to it, but it's a fun story, very sort of haunting tale, and it sets the stage for a lot of what happens later in the Lord of the Rings. So anyway, that's one place you can go. One other example I was going to give, which is more practical. So I've had this map up here kind of teasing. We can't hardly go a stream here on Blue Box without showing Anna's map. But as you...
not. I mean, that's,
It's just so gorgeous. But...
Listen, it was the genesis of my hardcore Greyhawk Rebirth, as opposed to just being the setting that I liked. It was like, okay, completely rediscovered my love of the world. in a big way.
No, absolutely. And, Pat just mentioned, don't think they won't, Pat. These are books that I got from my Secret Santa, Pat 66, and this is all kinds of Tolkien lore. And as a DM, I love stuff like this because, again, I want to create my own stories, but I am not so foolish as to believe that I'm going to create a set of lore and content and richness in a world that exists in something like this, or, for example, in 40 plus years of Greyhawk lore and history, or things that are written by hundreds or even thousands of different people to create this content. I do like creating homebrew worlds, but the reality is there's so much rich content here that can be adapted. That's always a place that I like to go.
Well, take inspiration wherever you can find it. I'd be the first to admit, and I think I've said this before, but my entire concept of how I do the management of the Feywild, it straight from the very recent Dresden Files novels, because I love the way the summer and winter courts are set up there, and I use them liberally because the other interesting thing is I've got players who have read the novel, so when I bring in one of the Winter Queens, they're afraid. They're very afraid because they know, even if their characters don't technically know, they know that they need to tread very carefully, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, very true, very true. And I misspoke a moment ago, but it was because Pat was commenting in the chat. It was actually Tracy, his wife, that was my Secret Santa. And I know that so well because she baked the most amazing chocolate cake as well that lasted exactly 3 days in my house. And I consumed 90
days.
Yeah, 98
you're restrained
by myself.
You're restrained to something.
I was restrained. All right, so quickly here, what I want to show everyone is you've got the initial starting area that we had for Greyhawk Awakening in Book 1. And so we were in Verbabonk. We started out in Hamlet, the most frequently traveled area of the Flyness in terms of, games and campaigns. Then for the second one, we moved here to the east, the coast, right off the Solnor Ocean to Relastra, and the party has journeyed north. That has been really, the journey of Book 2, which now has them here in these Raker Mountains at a culmination point for what they've been seeking. But I have been teasing Book 3 now for 2 years, and Book 3 takes place in one of the least adventured or explored areas of the Flyness, which is here in the Sea of Dust. Also the Dry Steppes, but really the focal point, the Sea of Dust. Now, as all of you Greyhawk fans know, this was the former empire of the Suel. And you had the Baklunish empires here to the north of the Suthout Mountains. You had the Suel here in the south. And it was the invoked devastation and the reign of colorless fire, which are referred to as the twin cataclysms, which took place over about 1,000 years ago in Greyhawk lore. And it was sort of mutually assured destruction. You've got to remember, this lore was created around the time of the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, and everyone had this fear of nuclear apocalypse. You had a lot of apocalyptic Armageddon type of storytelling and language that existed, and I'm sure that must have influenced Gary and the creators here for what happened here. It was an escalation. It was an arms race, but instead of a nuclear arms race, it was an arcane arms race that left this absolutely scorched and destroyed area. Well, guess what? Go ahead, Robert.
It's kind of interesting because I'd have to go check myself on this, but the invoked devastation is definitely arcane. I believe the reign of colorless fire is almost a divine punishment. They brought down the power of channeled the power of the gods to bring down the rain. So it's like a contrast between the two of them. But yeah, basically you effectively have a magical, whether arcane or divine, nuclear wasteland there.
Yeah, exactly. And no, you're, Robert, I'm using the word arcane in a more general sense to differentiate it from nuclear. But yes, you're exactly that. It's magical in means. Now, A game is about to head into the Sea of Dust. Oh, that's cool, Red Monk. Well, I think that's a great place to play. Now, you got to think it's been 1,000 years, and I don't want to give away too much of what I have planned, but I am running essentially the Dark Sun 2E game system in the Flyness. So this is another example of sort of ultimate adaptation. So I'm going to take this is Athos, as you would have seen it in sort of 2E. You've got the city of Tyr here up against the mountains. All this burnt wasteland underneath the dark sun. It is so perfectly aligned. In fact, I've got to believe it was influenced by Greyhawk and the Sea of Dust. I know Thri-kreen exist in Greyhawk, and of course Thri-kreen are a major race in Athos. But if you look here, you've got this, the ringing mountains here, where the forests, which are sort of mythical for those that live here in the deserts, behind these mountains. Look how nicely that aligns with the ranges here. You've got the Mahiri Range to the south, and you've got the Iyukura, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Iyurizi Mountains to the north. So you've got all these sort of ringing mountains around the edges. I'm going to be able to transpose, and I'll change some of the names, but I'll transpose many of these cities and locations, and I'm changing much of the lore. But you can basically take Athos, drop it into the Sea of Dust, and say, okay, it's now been 1,000 years since the twin cataclysms. Has it remained a complete wasteland? I say no. I say civilization has risen again. Why isn't it more well known throughout the Flyness? There's a very good reason for that you're going to see uncovered in Book 3. So part of the reason I wanted to show this is that when you're adapting anything, whether it's published content to your homebrew or published into published, the idea of coherence is critical. You can't just drop something, well, you can, but you shouldn't just drop something in and say, oh, here's this, and it's different than all of that. Then it feels disconnected to your players and the story doesn't flow. So with what we're doing here for Blue Box and GHA Book 3, there is at least a reasonable explanation and a think through of how everything has happened and why it works to play a Dark Sun style game and campaign based in Greyhawk lore. What happened to those ancient Suel civilizations? What really occurred during that reign of colorless fire and the invoked devastation? And how does that create a rich game world? The twisted abominations that can live there. You've got the Imperial Wastes here, which really line up nicely. Right here, you got the Imperial Wastes here in the Forgotten Cities. This is the most devastated, most sort of toxic area of the Sea of Dust, and lines up really nicely with what you see here in the Great Silt Plains and the Ivory Plains and some of these huge desolate areas that are inside of the world of Athos. So anyway, I've droned on a bit there, Rob. I just wanted to get through that so everybody could see it. I'm going to let you take back over, and I'm going to look at the chat.
And by the way, that's a lovely segue into taking the homebrew content and putting it in a published world, the second half of the conversation. And it's funny, one of the best things for me in terms of the world of Greyhawk, and one of the reasons I love it so much is the fact that, as a DM anyway, is the fact that because so much of it was left undone, you have large licensed, and you know that, especially because you know that nothing's really coming in terms of new published content, you can basically just take pieces like the Sea of Dust and do what you want with it. I mean, what better place to, again, you mentioned, dropping in Dark Sun because of, the nature of the Dark Sun world, Athos, versus what the Sea of Dust, and even if you went up to the Backlunish areas, you could fit it in there too if you really want, just as well. But, come up with all the homebrew monsters that you want, or those terrifying monsters that you just really couldn't justify putting in a camp because they didn't really seem to fit anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gosh, I mean, there's some glorious stuff out there. And the published content, it can give you ideas for monsters. It can give you idea for NPCs. I've already got a folder that I've created. I'm just storing dozens and dozens and hundreds of images and different adventures and published ideas, and it's just a hodgepodge of inspiration that will get pulled out at times, and it is a fun way to create. To me, that is, I do some creation from scratch, Robert. I do the sort of the Genesis creation. I've got a book that I wrote that's kind of that way. But when it comes to like my wheelhouse is taking the stuff that's out there and finding creative ways to tie it together and tell great stories.
Sure. And you kind of touched on my next point when actually really went over my next point with you were mentioning the fourth age, and that's the concept. It's like okay, when you're putting your stuff in your homebrew stuff in a published world, it's a question of not only where but when, because most of these worlds have a timeline, and it's useful to consider. It's like, well, do you want to have it in the timeline, at the whatever the current date is, as it were, for the published world, bearing in mind that if you're using a published world that is still being published currently and new stuff coming out, that date is going to change, and parts of that world may be subject to change. So, how do you want to handle that? Do you want to have it late or earlier? This way you don't have to worry about that. You know what's coming. Do you want to have it much later so that you're past all that? It's one of those things where it doesn't necessarily seem like a big deal, but just for instance, if you happen to be a Forgotten Realms aficionado and you want to put your stuff in Forgotten Realms, when is a very important question, considering the Forgotten Realms in terms of published content. The calendar year between the first edition version of the Forgotten Realms when it was first released versus the latest 5e content for it is, I believe, somewhere in the area of 150 years.
Yes.
Your human character from the first edition is long dead.
Yes, exactly.
Unless he became a lich, when that's a different problem.
No, I think very, very well said, Robert. We're getting some stuff in the chat, and yes, the Gourd books have influenced Book 2 of My Greyhawk Awakening, and they will definitely be influencing Book 3 as well. Let's have a little bit of fun with the audience here. Yes, I have, and in fact, so we're going to talk about a little bit of that stuff if we have time here. I'm going to show some images here, and let's see who the first people in chat can pop and tell me. So where is that? What's that locale? I'm showing on the screen right now. That should be a pretty easy one. This was from my fourth age game. These are images that I used, and because that's right. So you got Minas Tirith, the White City here. This was a major element of that Palantir quest module that I showed you earlier, and this is where the party kind of started out. Go ahead, Robert.
I'm not gonna lie. When they first showed it in, when did we? I guess first showed it in Return of the King.
Yeah.
I was at the point where I didn't think I could have many more WoW moments left.
Yes. No, that was. Yeah, I was the same way. All right. How about this one? Can anyone get? This is a little less well known. We'll give everybody a second. Dun 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 dun. This is Detroit. Jeff said Detroit.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where. That looks like the place from The Hobbit where.
You're thinking like Weathertop? No. So this is kind of Dol Guldur, which is where in my game I had the mouth.
No, not Weathertop.
Okay.
Where in the Hobbit movies, when Gandalf went to find the necromancer.
Oh yes, that's exactly right. Yes, exactly. Well done, Robert. So then, how about stuff like this? This is fun. You were talking about the creative. The creative stuff, these are, travel forms that were built up for the Sea of Dust or Athos and will be used in the Sea of Dust. You've got these.
Somebody just mentioned that.
Yeah, in the chat, I saw that earlier. Sand sails. Some of that was in the Gourd books as well. Or how about stuff like these guys? I love these. In fact, can anybody pop in the chat and tell me what these gigantic insectile creatures are that are pulling this armored caravan? They have a name in Athos, and they will exist in Greyhawk. They will be in the Sea of Dust. So these are just examples of things. Again, I'm showing sort of published ideas and content that you can then adapt into your game world and tell fantastic stories with it. Anyone have a guess as to what that whoops, I switched off. Let me pull it back up. What that creature is?
And my Dark Sun Athos world is non-existent.
They're called. Why does that keep popping on? Hold on here, stupid thing.
Because it really wants to show Anna's map.
It does. Yes, it is biased toward Anna's map. Not Kanks. Those are Melicots. And yes, you have all kinds of creatures that are used to pull huge armored caravans. I love it, like something as simple as an image like this can be inspirational to me for ideas for games. Here you've got a Mool warrior. Why? I don't. For some reason, Anna's map is just insisting on popping up. We'll show that in a second. Yes, you got lizards, you got all kinds, you got things that look like gigantic Gila monsters. So all these twisted abominations. So you're embarrassed you don't know much about Greyhawk or Dark Sun. Well, just hang around here a little while longer, Dark Elf. I know you've been in a lot of our streams. You'll find out anything Greyhawk oriented. You see Lord Gazumba in the chat. We're going to raid into him in a moment. He does Gabbin shows every single week, and he has the biggest authorities on the world of Greyhawk, some of the original content creators. And there is always a really in-depth discussion that happens there. So if you want to learn more about that world and the Flyness, you'll get some of it here. You'll get a lot of it there as well. So I've played Forgotten Realms quite a bit. It's been years, but not Eberron. I've never really played in Eberron, never played in Mystara, and really probably don't feel the need to. Aird is a great game setting. And Robert, maybe just talk a little bit about Aird as a setting, because I know you are very close with, by the way, I want to say thank you again to Troll Lord Games. And in fact, while you're thinking on what you want to say, let me shout out a couple sponsors. TLG, Chuck and Steven, absolutely fantastic. They create castles and crusades, but their world, Aird, is a really fun world with great lore. And they also popped in for our Greyhawk Awakening Session 100 and gave a $100 gift certificate to their store. They have been very generous to the community, and we really appreciate them. Another that I want to shout out is Mantic Games, makers of Terrain Crate and also Kings of War. I got a box today, Robert. I popped it in the Discord. You saw that. A lot of these gorgeous settings. These are the dungeons in a box. They include the minis, the scatter terrain, the battle maps. It's got the adventure book. We're going to run this as a one-shot. They sent me a couple of them. Gigantic dragon that they sent. All kinds of miniatures. This one is called the Green Rage, a bunch of green raging miniatures. So all kinds of stuff that you'll see given away here. Thank you very much to our sponsor, Mantic Games.
They could have made so much money off me at PAX Unplugged, but no, all the stuff that they had for that I could see was stuff I already had. None of those were there. I didn't, at least not on display. But talking about Aird, Aird is one of those things where I'm like trying to make my way through the lore of it, because when we started Friday Night Crusades, I originally started them on one of these storylines, and I suddenly realized running through it that, okay, this is much more tied into lore than I thought it was going to be, one of the module series. And it was also a little hard with the shifting player numbers week to week, but there is so much lore, and it's so good. You want to talk about somebody who put so much thought into it. It's one of those things where sometimes the world of Greyhawk has some fascinating lore, and a lot of it has been filled in over the years by various people to help flesh things out, and some of it's become pseudo accepted lore. The work that Steven did in building the lore for the world of Aird is just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we had him on and he was talking about it, and we had Rachel on with us, and you watch Rachel. You knew just watching Rachel's jaw drop as it was going, because I was probably slack-jawed myself just listening to it. but there's so many things there, and there's he talks about the different zones and inspired by different parts of the world at in different time periods, which fascinated me because one of my original homebrew ideas was playing video games. One of the things I loved was the Age of Empires, and you could play the different types, different countries, and it kind of like used thematic when they were at their height of power and such. The different troop types and things, and I was like, wow. I now I'm looking at a campaign setting that has that feel. I'm like, oh wow, okay, I can do something with this. As a matter of fact, I'm looking to do something with it. I just have to find the time.
Yeah.
Brindisium calls to me. I mean, it's based on Rome. It's like, I can find something to do with this.
No, well said. Well said. Well, as we get ready to wrap up here with the last few minutes, and there's the map of Aird. So much content. By the way, is the stuff still up for the gifts for the end of the year, or have they pulled those codes down, Robert? The Trollord gifts.
I believe. Oh, I don't. Well, there is a sale happening. I don't know I don't think the gift codes still work. I think that ended the Monday after Christmas.
Yeah, Dark Elf. This is Aird.
Last check though.
Yeah.
There was a 40. There was for their main store at last check, and I literally just bought pretty much the rest of the stuff I didn't have in digital. They had a 40% off sale going for digital content. Let me see if it's still up.
Okay. While you're checking that, I want to reward the folks who've come out on a Wednesday night between Christmas and New Year's and supported us as you guys have supported us all year long. And I'm going to give you tonight the first. I'll start teasing some of this as we get closer. Book 3, if you're wondering. I get this question a lot about Tears of Air. When is that change going to happen from the level 0 children to the age up that's going to happen in the game? I don't know exactly. It's not preset. It's going to follow the flow of the game and the story, and I'll know when the moment is right. It's very similar with Greyhawk Awakening, the movement between books. We're going to have a return to book 1 for some time. At book 3 will carry on, or book 2 will carry on. I'm thinking book 3 will make its premiere somewhere late spring, maybe as late as early summer, but probably late spring this year. And there is so much work that's already being done. Custom artwork, custom music, custom mapping, custom Tailspire assets, physical minis and terrain, things to support really just the ecosystem and the story, irrespective of what the players do or where they go. It's a whole different type of world. I don't have a lot of minis that work for that. I don't have a lot of terrain that works for that. I've got a few pieces. But then all the lore that has to be built up around it, all that stuff is being worked on. But I'll tease just one bit of it. One of the questions that I had, Robert, was for myself, back to this idea of coherence. If there is a civilization there in the Sea of Dust, that's one of my other Pathfinder adaptations. Hang on here, not trying to scare everybody. Let me open this up real quick. I'm going to share with you a kind of a bit of the lore that I have developed here, which I think really works, or at least I hope it does, and I hope you guys agree. So. This is the Sea of Dust. One of the questions I had was, okay, if there is civilization here that's risen up over the eon, whoops, I'm yanking the wrong thing around here, over the eon since the twin cataclysms, why don't you hear more about it? Why aren't you seeing it more in other parts, referenced in other parts of the Flyness? And also, why would people even stay there? Why do people live in this place, which is so inhospitable and so? Well, if you read some of the invoked or the Reign of Colorless Fire, invoked devastation, what happened in those cataclysms? There are references to what happened to the terrain and the earth. The fouling of the air is referenced. That the very air itself has become toxic. And so to me, this solves two problems. where do you get this dark sun from? Where do you get this overwhelming heat? You still have the same sun that shines upon the Flanaess. So to me, it is the augmentation of what exists in the atmosphere. Think of it almost, if we were to use a material concept, like we've talked about doing things on our own planet, forcing cooling by releasing particles into the atmosphere. So here, there is this residue, this arcane divine residue up in the atmosphere, which distorts and augments the sun. Think of it almost like the magnifying glass effect. And it's confined to this area within the mountain ranges here, almost like a snow globe, if you will, but a sand globe, through the arcane and divine energies that were released. So the sun in this area continues to beat down. While it's the same sun that's over the rest of the Flanaess, its delivery and its impact here is very different because of the atmosphere. Similarly, this solves the problem of travel. So over the eon, anything that has been born to this area, be it creatures, races, has breathed this air, is only survived and adapted to exist in this environment. Moving over those mountains, and I've even got an idea with how the dry steppes exist, as there's something else that could happen there. But moving outside of this area, any creature that comes in for an extended period of time, more than a few days, will die. Any creature that leaves this area, goes, let's say, to, tries to head over to, Hamlet, will not survive, because it is uniquely adapted to survive in the environment, in the atmosphere specifically, that exists here in this area. To me, that is a pseudoscience, logical explanation for how this area exists, becomes similar to Athos, but also really prevents or deeply limits traversing back and forth, almost putting it on an island inside the world.
That's a fascinating way of going about it. I like it. It's kind of funny when I think about, for me, like the Sea of Dust and the two areas. The things that I would take into consideration is one of the reasons that nobody goes back there is because a lot of the races migrated even before it happened. If you look at the time charts or the calendar listing for when the rest of the Flanaess was, for better term, was invaded, because the Flan were already there. Everybody else came in and just basically landed wherever they landed, and wars were fought and such. But a lot of them left even before the devastation happened, much less the Reign of Colorless Fire, which came afterward.
Right.
So it's almost as if not only is it a terrible thing, but it's also more word of mouth. The people who left, or the people who went to the rest of the world, they probably never saw any of it firsthand. They know what they've heard, and it's a horrible. It sounds horrible.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that, going in is less the problem than the getting out. Why do the denizens not flee such an inhospitable place, and then reconciling the nature of the sun and whatnot. So I think, in summary, by the time we launch this, it will make a ton of sense. The way it's built out, it will be consistent with Greyhawk and the Flanaess lore. I think it's going to expand on the nature of the Suel Empire and what happened at that time in a way that will be honoring to the lore. I'm just super excited. So to me, this whole idea of adaptation of published content to homebrew content to homebrew worlds, mixing published settings, blending things to tell stories. This is what I do daily as a DM, and I thought this was a great subject, and I'm glad you brought it up, Robert.
I love this kind of stuff. Just figuring out where to put things. And we can have a deeper conversation at another time regarding the use of published settings and how to do it, how to make it work for you. If if you don't have the time to do a homebrew world, or you're getting your homebrew world ready, but you need something for a game beforehand, we can have that conversation and go a lot more in depth. But
Agreed.
This has been a fantastic talk.
Agreed. I really enjoyed it. Robert, you did a great job. In closing, I'm just going to mention here kind of a summary of a few points that I had for the practical element of what you need to do. And these are all obvious. One, make sure you read through whatever the content is. As a DM, that pre-reading and familiarity is very important. So if you're going to adapt it to your world, read the whole thing through. That's going to tell you where your roadblocks and bottlenecks could be. Secondly, look at the setting and make sure you have the geography, the culture, and the ecology all appropriate and mapped to where you want it in your world. Third, make sure you adapt your rule sets and stats. Of course, that's pretty obvious. Coherence to the campaign is something that I've been harping on tonight. Make sure that it feels, to Robert's comment earlier, not like you've just plug something in, but that it feels very coherent and matching to the rest of your campaign. And then adapting the names, the lore, and changing as little as possible. If the published content has a name, for example, that you don't need to change, don't change it, because the less you change, the less work you have to do to remember to change it all the way through everything else. So only change the things that you need to change to make it fit in your setting. Those are kind of a top 5 or 6 items that I had for adaptation. And then the overarching thing would be, don't be afraid. Just have fun with it. And if you flub something, if some lore doesn't match up, remember, it's a game. Everyone's having a good time, and no one's going to go, gotcha, you messed that. So, and no dinosaurs, no Jonosaurs. What is it with these people, Rob? What is it with these people? Rob, I'm going to give you the last word as I get ready to raid Jay here.
I think you captured it perfectly. The last thought, beyond the dinosaurs, was just don't be afraid. Borrow liberally from wherever you need to borrow to make things work. Don't be beholden to anything. Make it work for you. It's your game. It's your table. Go have fun with it. And, if your players are having fun and you're having fun, nothing else matters. Nobody else's opinion matters. It's all what you do with it, and, do with it so that everyone at your table is enjoying it.
Absolutely. Hey, if you enjoyed this chat and you want to continue it, we do have a Loremasters Arcanum channel in our Discord. There was already some pre-conversation that happened today. Pop in there and enjoy it. We won't do the one question because we're already over time tonight, but I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. There will not be a stream on Blue Box on Sunday as we are celebrating the new year, and we got all kinds of stuff going on with families and people out, but we will be back with our regular schedule next week. So we'll have Greyhawk Awakening on Tuesday. We'll have Loremasters Arcanum on Wednesday, and then we'll have Tears of Aird the following Sunday. So we'll be right back on our regular schedule to kick off the new year. And with that said, I want to give another thank you to everyone that joined us last night. Thank you for all the support. Our numbers were very strong here through the holiday season. Yeah?
We need to ask them a question.
Oh, I said we weren't going to ask the question, but let's go ahead and ask the question.
Okay,
Wait, you know what? Let's go ahead, Rob. Let's do it. How can we not do it? If you're watching tonight and you haven't followed, if you are, Rob, you go ahead and ask it.
Or if you're a follower and you have not yet subscribed, or you're a subscriber and your subscription.
No, say it's not so, Rob.
Say it's not so. We have here at Blue Box have one question for you.
What are you doing? Come on, give us a follow, give us a sub. It's like you can see it's become a thing here, and I have to give, it was like a couple other things here on the stream. It was my son, I think, that was the first one that came up with that. Jordan did a "What are you doing?" one time when he was on stream, and it just has become one of our things. So thank you, everyone. Rating Lord Gazumba now. Have a great week and a happy new year.
Oh.
There we go.